All right, David, thanks for coming on, man. I wanna make sure you get on in here, talk about, you know, what you've been working on. You have a lot of unique history, and like me, father of some young kids, so you're balancing it all. And we got connected because of the U Miami, alumni connection. Go Canes! But you're the founder, you're CEO of McCombie Group. Starting in I think 2010 it was you started that business. Looks like you're a veteran deal negotiator, author of selling your business with confidence. You're Harvard educated, former McKinsey consultant. You have IB experience. I know you have been or on the board of a few companies. You contribute to Forbes, and in general, you're educator for business owners and people alike. Plus, like you were telling me before we got on here, you're also doing the dad thing and dance recitals and all that, right? So, um, aside from help, in the your president's organization, doing a lot in the community. So, I really want to share your story and more than that, like the challenges and successes of what it takes to just achieve what you care about in life. And so, um, before we get into any of that, some of that, give me an idea, like what got you here, like what brought you into this. Yeah, you obviously have been involved in a number of different things in your career and in life. How did we get here? Like what brought you into M&A? What brought you into the whole family life and doing all the things you're doing today? Like what inspired you this sort of path?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. And I guess I'll start on the professional side. In a lot of ways, I feel like I was destined to do this. When I was a kid, I thought I'd be doing deal making. I didn't really have a great word for it, but always, um, looked up to and admired a lot of major figures within the city. And it's one of those things that kind of got registered in the back of my head. And as I went through my additional schooling and all of that, I picked up little tidbits that essentially helped prepare me to be successful in what I currently am doing. Um, one of the elements was when I went off to Harvard Law School, I focused pretty much all my time on mergers and acquisitions and negotiation and, classes that dealt with business issues versus, the more traditional kind of legal training, focused on criminal law and that variety of tasks. I did briefly do, investment banking in Wall Street. Quite frankly, it wasn't my cup of tea. I could talk a little bit about that. Just was not aligned with who I was and what I wanted to do. But really, my story really started in 2010 when I was working at McKinsey Company, a large consulting firm, and I lost my job. And at that point, in theory, you could say that probably I should have waited a little bit longer, had a little bit more experience. I was 26 at the time, but life throws you a curveball, and you got to kind of make the most of it. And so, ultimately, those initial years where I really focused on fixing messes from the great financial crisis, really gave me a good foundation that ultimately allowed me to, to be who I am as a deal maker. And as part of that journey, I ended up, raising capital from some large families and actually doing individual private equity deals myself. And ultimately, came to the conclusion, almost kind of full circle, that I really like the advisory side. And at this point, we've exited all the investments except one. But the realization was, I'm a value investor, meaning, I think that the pricing that is market out there is too high for me to get comfortable with. But B, in terms of what I wanted for myself, my family, from a lifestyle standpoint, the advisory business was, a much better, fit. And so over the past, 4 or 5 years, we really have uh, refocused our efforts primarily towards that. And thankfully, we've done great. We've done about 2 billion of transaction volume, over that period, and hopefully, we'll be doing multiples of that going forward. But one of the drivers of that, like I said, from a lifestyle standpoint, was my family.
Mm.
I got married right before COVID, and my wife and I I have two wonderful daughters, 3 and 1. And ultimately, if you're pursuing the traditional private equity route, you've got to be on a plane and finding the best deals across the country. Um, it's not about your lifestyle; it's about what's best for
Right.
the fund and the investment returns. Um, and one of the factors that was really important to me was being present in their life, being able to sleep in my own bed. From my past in McKinsey, I had periods where I was on the road 50 weeks of the year, and so when you're young, that's exciting and learn a lot. But as you learn what's important to you and what you like, I realized that's really not the life that I wanted to sign up for.
I can appreciate that, and it sounds like you were able to figure that out a little bit early. Yeah, so obviously your kids are young. You got a lot of time ahead, and which is good. You can be intentional with your efforts. Um, so I know you said deal negotiation in something business transactions. You were in private equity. What are some of the things? What are some of the biggest hurdles to get over in some of these deal negotiations you have to manage, or in your experience, like what's been your biggest challenge in becoming sort of an expert in this field?
Sure. Yeah, look, from my vantage point, there's the technical skills, and actually that's really important and was important in my time in Wall Street. But when you talk about the middle market, which is where I focus now, you're talking about business owners that are both economically and emotionally invested in their businesses.
Mm,
All their eggs are in one basket, and it's their baby, right? And so they deal with it from a very emotional standpoint. And so, what I find is actually the most complicated is dealing with managing the emotional dynamics. It reminds me of a quote that I think Einstein said, which was, "Imagine how much harder physics would be if electrons had feelings." And so, you think about all of us, whether we're professionals or not, engage with the world and make decisions often from an emotional standpoint, right? And not always purely from a rational standpoint.
right.
And so, a lot of the a lot of the most challenging aspects that I deal with is more the art of M&A, which is dealing with people as they are, with the backgrounds and histories and all that they come to the table with. Obviously, there's a very large component of educating them and helping them understand what's going to happen and why. But there's also a large component of just helping them work through some of the different challenges that they have. In particular, I've come to the conclusion that a lot of the big impediments that people often put up often derive from you know uh, a reaction to not feeling a sense of control.
Mm,
Right? They're in a new situation where they're not calling the shots, and it makes them feel very vulnerable. And we actually earlier today had a conversation about just this matter, in that we have a client that ultimately, to be even keeled through this process, has basically convinced themselves of hey, um, uh, I'm not going to believe it till I see it, and until the wire goes into my bank account, and that allows them to kind of have that equilibrium. Unfortunately, it also has them take the perspective of I'm not going to do the preparation that I necessarily should do, and you know ultimately wanting to delay to do those things, even things like making themselves available, scheduling, or avoiding vacations, things like that.
right.
When this is a life changing transaction for them,
Yeah.
it's a order of magnitude larger amount of money than they've ever been exposed to, and yet there's um, often a reluctance from their vantage point to want to kind of jump in head first and to do all the things that will maximize the likelihood that we have a successful
Yeah.
outcome. And so from my vantage point, um, it's a lot of it is around educating, particularly upfront, the client, and saying, hey, these are things that we often see, and be on the lookout, because once we get closer, these may be some reactions that you have, and it's quite frankly normal and it's human,
Yeah.
but it's nonetheless something that's really critical to having a successful outcome.
Yeah. It's funny. Everyone likes in theory to believe that they're capable of accepting change or feeling uncomfortable knowing that that's a good thing. But then when it comes down to myself or themselves, when you're sort of in it, you're like, oh, I have to identify that I'm actually in this cycle of change and I have to be okay being a little uncomfortable. And that's what's good about it, not what's not good about it. Right.
Yep.
Yeah, change management or change reluctance is a big thing. I've experienced it myself and even just running a business. You're like, all right, like we got to make a shift here. It's very comfortable doing what we've been doing, but maybe not the best route forward from this point. Because as you've probably seen, as businesses grow, that their needs change. I mean, they're what got them sort of there won't get them to the next phase and the next phase and probably to the phase you want to get them to, which is an exit, right? And
Yeah.
transaction. Um, w-
And to that point, Michael, there's actually some really interesting psychological literature around what they call the ambiguity aversion, which is that some people, most people, would actually prefer to have kind of guaranteed unhappiness than uncertainty. And so you'll have a situation where, kind of heads, I lose $10, tails, I win $10. And they'd rather just have the loss. They know how to absorb it. They can move on with their life as opposed to, um, having this prolonged process where it's uncertain what the outcome is going to look like. Um, and unfortunately, that's not the best position from a negotiating standpoint,
mm,
right? Um, wanting to push things along prematurely, being overeager, may be very helpful with regards to building a business, but in terms of selling it, it definitely disadvantages you vis-a-vis, the negotiations. And so,
yeah.
being aware of that, nobody likes change. And the reality is, um, while the magnitude can differ, change is inevitable, right?
Hmm.
Nobody's going to pay you a boatload of money and have everything exactly the same. There will be some things, even if it's minor, that are different. And so it's one of the things I think is important is to really identify what that could look like up front,
Yeah.
get comfortable with it. And one of the ways to gain confidence in it is to go through a process where you feel like you're asking the right questions and you're making the most informed decision that you can possibly,
Hmm.
in a transaction.
Yeah. One of the things that, we've worked on with some of our clients that we work with is even if they're early or in the middle stage, reaching maturation or around the sort of exit timeframe is understanding what the ideal exit would be or life ideally looks like and helping them back into having some sort of vision for that. So it's already sort of pre-established as opposed to a last minute uh pull the ripcord and get out and
Yep.
have a lot of rushed feelings. But when you look at business growth, entrepreneurs, and obviously you've been on boards and you experience a lot of different businesses and the work you do. What are some of the things that you see as commonalities that should be addressed for somebody in the startup phase versus sort of that middle growth phase and then the latter sort of, hey, we're mature and looking for an exit phase? Like what are those in those three areas? Or maybe you break it up to more than just those three, but in general, like what are the commonalities of like, hey, we should be really business owners should be thinking about these things earlier. Do you have a few things that you've identified as common there?
Yeah. Look, from my vantage point, one of the things that's, you know, something I found to be true is it's a lot easier to stay organized than to get organized, right? And so building the systems and
Yeah.
and kind of being organized from the get go will save a lot of pain and suffering afterwards.
Mm,
And the reality is, it's a prudent thing to do regardless. Even if you don't sell your business, it reduces risk. It may help you. You're going to get financing from a bank or an array of different things. I think early in the journey, quite frankly, and I guess it depends how early we're talking about, but early in the journey, I think it's really around refining the business model so that you have that product market fit, and you really can then start scaling it. At least what I found from my experience was, at least at the beginning, I did a lot of different things. I hustled, I guess, if you will, to put food on the table. but didn't necessarily have strategic coherence, which made it difficult, quite frankly, to market and to really develop fully the skill set that I ultimately did develop. So um, I do think that it's natural in a startup type environment that you're iterating and you're trying to kind of figure out where is the opportunity where you're really good at and the market is willing to compensate you, for it.
Mm.
Once you get past that stage, I think it's prudent to, like I said before, to kind of stay prepared all along. I think it's illustrative to look how private equity operates. Private equity, you may like them or not, but the reality is they're professional buyers whose job is to maximize a business and then flip it for a profit. And so they've developed a lot of tools and tactics which really do work. And so I think there are things that can be implemented throughout the life of a business. The first, going back to preparation is typically they have their CFO and their portfolio companies um, compile and continuously keep up to date the information so that they can basically go to market at any moment in time.
Mm.
And so that not only obviously allows them to be prepared and to have discussions opportunistically, but it also allows them to think strategically and to see, um, you know, the connections between different things and the opportunities. Similarly, if you have the luxury of time and you're not intending to sell in any kind of immediate term, then you really can basically reverse engineer your business to what you want, right? So, um, one of the principles of any type of strategy is, where do you start? Where are you starting, and where do you want to go?
Right.
And what are the milestones to get you from point A to point B? And so, if you have the luxury of time, you can, spend that trying to intentionally grow your business to what the market is going to value the most. And so, the way that I like to recommend people think about it is first and foremost to go and look internally at their own information and to say, okay, where am I making money? Where am I growing? Where is there kind of, from my experience and anecdotes that I have internally, where is there additional opportunities that I might consider pursuing? And I think crossing that with what you see externally,
Mm.
whether it's market reports, whether it's trends in the industry, or just different proxies of which are highly prioritized by potential buyers, and that essentially can be your roadmap for things that you can prioritize in terms of the long term state.
Yeah.
And going back to the milestones, what I think private equity does really well is essentially building intermediary milestones and holding themselves accountable on a frequent basis. What I mean by that is, they know every week what are the top priorities, who's responsible, when is it supposed to be done by, and they essentially know, are they tracking for their 5-year goal or not? And they may not be, but at least they're continuously monitoring themselves and trying to hold themselves accountable. And so it requires a tremendous amount of discipline. It's a pain in the ass, quite frankly, but the results are astronomically higher than if you just basically say, okay, I'm going to do my best every day, but I don't necessarily have those specific goals and objectives that I intend to achieve. And that exercise allows you to align with your team and get on the same page so that they're also expending all of their energy to achieve
Yeah.
the broader goal
Not getting
that you
bogged
have.
down in things that aren't really as high priority. They might be important, or they might be loud and noisy things, but not maybe the most high priority things that are going to drive forward the mission or the vision you have laid out. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I mean, we find that about only 1 out of 4 business owners have done any preparation before coming to us to sell their business. And I get it. The urgent pushes out the important. I also feel, going back to the emotions element, that a lot of business owners, it's just, uh, it's a big decision to make, and often they don't spend a lot of time thinking about it because there's just other less taxing things to worry about. But
Yeah.
typically, what happens is I find that some type of life changing event occurs. An illness occurs, a close friend passes away, whatever it might be, and then all of a sudden there's a realization of, hey, maybe I should be thinking about the world differently and prioritizing my life differently.
Yeah.
But um, the ideal state is they take that time and they're preparing, multiple years in advance, because if you're going and want to sell immediately, there's a very limited range of improvements you can make. But with the luxury of time, you can dramatically change your business. I mean, over a 3-year period, there's businesses that have doubled, tripled in size.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, opportunity if work intentionally at it.
Yeah. So you've been running your business now, what, 15 years, right?
Yep. Just had our 15-year
That's
anniversary.
awesome. Congrats.
Thank
What's been obviously you have a lot of successes. You built and you work with a lot of different business owners. What are some of the biggest challenges that you look at internally as you build your firm, whether it's internally or externally? What are some of the intrinsic challenges that you've been meeting over the last decade and a half as you've built it up?
both through my own business, but also the businesses I've invested in and businesses I advise. I've realized that the hardest part is by far the people side,
Mm,
right? In terms of um, identifying yourself, what do you actually want, and what is the role, what does the role entail, and then identifying the right people and getting them in the seats, and then ultimately setting them up for success in terms of training and all of that, and then operating effectively, together as a team. And I definitely can say that it's a kind of work in progress. I've learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes, over those years. And hopefully you make it once and you learn from it. But I think that that's one of the kind of broader lessons that I realized is something that I didn't necessarily appreciate when I was younger,
mm,
where I feel like in school there's a prioritization on the technical skills and the soft skills, which as I get more senior, I realize are actually the most important.
yeah.
Really were deemed not important. And
Right.
a perfect example of that is sales, right? When I was in college, the professors basically treated sales as a dirty word, but the reality is that it's the foundation of everything that we do. And quite frankly, it took me many years to kind of reprogram my brain to realize that sales was important and that I was actually pretty good at it. The reality is a conception of, a car salesman
Right.
is not what sales really means in the general world, particularly in terms of B2B sales or, high value sales. Um, but it definitely is one of those things that, when I was younger, I thought, based upon kind of what I heard from the teachers and all that, um, that the technical skills were, really what was going to define success or
Right.
not.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting how, to some degree, I mean, maybe this is just how I was raised. My father was an entrepreneur, so he was in sales to some degree. Really, he was in sales, newspaper, entire businesses. And then I feel like the perception was like, oh, you have to go get a 4-year degree and be technically skilled. And I graduated with 2 engineering degrees and a business minor and nearly no foundation for entrepreneurialism aside from seeing my family do it. And I was like, I'm going to be, a employee and work up in this corporate hierarchy. And then where I really found my sort of calling was in sales, really like working with people on solving complex problems. That's really what it
Sure.
is, right? Bringing
Yep.
sort of things that people need to the table for them, helping them achieve what they want. And yeah, that's been not my, I'd say my biggest struggle as a professional, as a leader when I was in a sales organization, and then as a business owner today, it's like finding the right people. It's really about the interpersonal connectivity and understanding what person needs to go in what seat and being good at, again, galvanizing the mission and all those things. And I've been a big fan of growing in that way because I know that's what it takes to be a good leader. I know that I can't do everything. Um, but I appreciate you saying that because I feel like that is one of the biggest things I've seen for companies, especially the ones that even we work with. I have some clients or people that I've worked with that are really, really technically good in their role, whether it's a trade, like a
Sure.
trades business, plumber, roofer, what have you, or it could be a technical thing in technology, but maybe not quite. the growth engine on the sales side, and it's like you can be really, really good at your trade, but you gotta get in front of people to grow your business, and you gotta be also really good at getting teams built around you to scale if you really want independence one day and not continue to just be a cog in your own wheel, so to speak. So I really can appreciate that. I know you wrote a book. Tell me a bit about that. Like, what's the inspiration behind that? What are some of the sort of key takeaways that someone should be looking for in there when they read it?
Yeah. So, Selling Your Business with Confidence came out about 4 or 5 months ago.
Congrats.
And, the inspiration was, my biggest competitor I found has not been actually another M&A advisor. It's actually been people trying to do it themselves.
Mm,
And so really it was an attempt for me to explain, um, what does excellence really look like? And for them to realize that, for their most valuable asset that they have, trying to do it themselves is really a big mistake. And so, quite frankly, the process of writing the book, I think mirrors a lot of my entrepreneurial journey in that I committed to do it, uh, underestimating how hard it would be. I really thought it would be a fraction of the amount of work that it actually was. And but as an entrepreneur, you make a commitment and then you jump in and you figure it out and you deliver, right?
right.
And so it's something that I'm really, proud of. And ultimately, the book goes through the entire process and all the different technical elements, and really helps somebody gain confidence, at least of knowing what's going to happen. I like to say it's like before, we had our first child, we went to birthing class, and it didn't make the birth any easier, but at least we weren't scared to death that at every step of the way of what's going to happen, and oh my
Right.
God, my wife is going to die.
Everything's a
Um,
surprise.
and so similarly, kind of understanding what's going to happen for the players, why are they acting the way that they do, and giving people, context should help them be, much more confident in, in the process. Um, I think one of the big takeaways that that's within it is that managing yourself is half the battle.
Mm,
And so it's really around understanding, um, particularly when you're under the influence of emotions and stress, and being highly burdened with a lot of different things, how that can impact your decision making and your ability to be successful in the ultimate sales process.
yeah. I feel like that goes into the sort of space of mindset, which our minds will tell us things that maybe aren't true about ourselves and put us in a weird mind space versus being able to talk to yourself in the right way, give yourself the right feedback, and put yourself in the right headspace. And that goes for any high performing person, right? And a lot of the people that we're working with and you're working with are high performing people in some
Sure.
capacity of built what they did, right? But it's like not just in business, it's like fitness and in life. And obviously you built a business and but you have young children and you're trying to be, a good parent, and it's about all the things coming together and managing those emotions. And I find that as an entrepreneur, it's like one of the most it'll test you in more ways than you ever imagined. And you'll be like, all right, like I was good at X, Y, or Z, and then you're like get kicked down a few times. Like, all right, I guess I'm humbled, and I could figure out a way to be resilient. But it's all about just getting up and moving to the next phase and having people around you that are there with you along for the journey. And that's why you and me are have a profession, which is kind of cool. But um, still really
I
like
couldn't agree
why,
more.
yeah, right,
Because at the end of the day, it's easy to be an entrepreneur when times are good,
yeah,
but the reality is if you're going to do it long enough, you will have hard times. And
yeah,
I remember back at the University of Miami many moons ago, being in business plan competitions and saying, yeah, I'd love to be an entrepreneur and this or that. But quite frankly, it wasn't until I lost my job and kind of launched this firm, and for the first few months started seeing my bank account go down every month, where you realize what it really feels like to
right,
be an entrepreneur. And you can have all the technical skills and capabilities, but if you don't have the stomach to go through the arduous trials and tribulations that come with just being an entrepreneur,
yeah,
and quite frankly, often just in life, um, it may not be the best fit. Ultimately, um, there's a lot of advantages of being an entrepreneur, and yet at the same time, there's a lot of disadvantages, and it's totally fine to say, you know what, that's not for me as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for me, I personally feel like, um, at this point, I'm unemployable. I'm like a cat gone feral, and I could never see myself kind of going back to one of the large, bureaucratic organizations. Um,
Yeah. Took the words out of my
and that's
mouth.
even with some of the challenges that you continuously have. Because the reality is, you think about as you get bigger and say, oh well, those challenges will go away. But the reality is, if you're growing, your challenges are only getting bigger, right? And the
Yeah.
stakes are even higher. So, it's one of those things that whether it's selling your business or anything else, managing yourself, keeping your head in the game, and getting the greatest value out of your capabilities, really is kind of a core element to
Yeah.
the success.
Yeah. You really did take the words out of my mouth about going back to a corporate environment. I just can't see it. Uh, it's weird that I feel like it's weird that I was ever there, but it was good experience and good learning, and not having it not work out similar to you, where just the next phase of my career was a little bit thrust upon me, which was good. I think it pushed
Sure.
me into something that I needed. Um, but also, yeah, you have to go into it open eyes, like it's going to be hard. And one of the things that I focus on is like it bothers me, but it doesn't at the same time, because I know there's like a big term vision and a legacy and something more important that we're working for than just the paycheck, right? And the sort of monetary part of it, which is obviously part of financial independence and building that, but also just an independence in life and freedom, I think comes with just doing something for yourself. And again, not everyone's going to be able to wrap their head around it or feel comfortable enough to do that. But there's a lot of people out there I know probably haven't realized it yet, because I didn't realize it until I sort of stumbled into it. Right. Um,
Hmm.
so no, that's really awesome. So obviously you mentor a lot of people, whether it's in your profession or it's on a board of a company, or it's in some of the things you're involved in, like the Young Presidents Organization. How about yourself? Do you have any mentors, or where do you get your guidance from? As somebody who's giving a lot of coaching, where do you learn, or what's been a good resource for you?
That's a great question. Absolutely. I mean, I would not have reached where I am today without people that really helped me, and quite frankly, people that paid it forward. There's one person in particular that God bless his soul, has since passed, but early in my process of being an entrepreneur, really went out of their way to help me. And had they not been there, I'd have had to go get a real job. Um, and so, yes, throughout the journey, I've always been very intentional about staying in touch with people that I thought that had wisdom and had something to share. Um, as an entrepreneur, I think you lose the kind of implicit mentorship and training that you get in a larger organization. And so I had to lean really heavily on it. But the other thing that I feel very grateful for is, aside from my teammates, which we have some incredible ones that have great backgrounds and from different vantage points and expertise, is our clients, right? Every single one of our clients is basically the epitome of the American dream. They built something from scratch, or if it wasn't from scratch, they definitely changed it dramatically and really built it much larger. And so I'm a firm believer in taking every interaction with somebody, regardless of who they are, but in particular with the clients that we often engage with, and trying to kind of learn from how do they think, what is it that made them successful, what were the skills that helped them get where they are. And I eventually did get an executive coach that has been very helpful in helping me see my blind spots, helping me address some of the different deficiencies that I've had that I really was never trained. But quite frankly, I think it's the large web of informal mentors that really helped me develop, and helped ultimately in terms of building up my brand and reputation over the long term. Um, what I like to tell young people is, um, it's not just about the seniority and the capabilities of that person. It's also about their openness and eagerness to help and to pay it forward. And so when you find somebody that's out there and willing to go to bat for you, that is really a prized jewel that you really should treasure. Um, Obviously, it gets less important as you go, further along in your career. But like I mentioned, it really, a number of different individuals in my past were absolutely instrumental in getting me
Mhm.
where I am. And it's one of those things that I feel, strong sense of responsibility in terms of paying it forward. In particular, and I do a lot of, speaking at University of Miami and a lot of different groups, trying to at least uh, convey what are some of the things I wish I would have known when I was younger. And yeah, I mean, I think um, entrepreneurship is lonely, particularly being the CEO. And another thing which was very helpful for me was joining YPO. But there are other CEO peer groups that all similarly serve a similar purpose, which is having a confidential resource and group of you know highly intelligent people in their own respective areas
Right.
that can give you their perspective on various issues without having a vested agenda.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was a really kind of powerful tool that also has accelerated the growth of my business over the past, call it 5 or 6 years.
Wow. I love that. Obviously podcasts like this and others are super informative and people can learn from
Sure.
them, but it's the power of having some of those relationships that, you obviously highly respect and they know you and you know them and they could, give you the hard talk once in a while and put you on the right path. And, if you're open to growth, you're open to hard coaching and you sort of need that. One of the, individuals who's been great for me is my buddy Jordan Montgomery. And he's always been somebody who, whenever I meet with him, is always something new. And I can tell he's always learning and always growing. And so I'm inspired to sort of do the same.
Yeah.
And he surrounds himself with people that are willing to do that as well. And, mentors, obviously people who inspire you, but mentors and coaches, a little bit different. I've mentor versus a coach, but, I think it was John Maxwell that was telling a story about him early in his career about wanting his own mentor, Coach Wooden. And he he's like, I need to sort of stand out. Like, how am I going to stand out? Um, and he wasn't really, I think, thinking that way when he did it, but he brought Coach Wooden like pages like 75 or something questions that he had for him because he's just so interested in him and his time and what he had to offer that the coach was like, "Oh, like you're standing out against all these other people who would love me as a mentor, but frankly aren't putting in the effort and showing me that they're like genuinely curious and care."
Hmm.
And so it's like, don't be afraid to go after, because again, like you said, someone's gonna pay it forward and give you their time and their knowledge, but obviously time is very valuable. So someone's gonna do that for you. They gotta, really believe in you. So you gotta show them that you're worth believing in, and don't be afraid to do that too early. I wish I could go back earlier in my life and sort of kick myself and be like, hey, like, like don't be afraid to just jump at that and really prove to somebody else that you're worthy of that time early on. Because being mentor now to some people, it's very fulfilling for the right people. Someone's going to put in the effort and show up and do what they say they're going to do and all that. So that's really cool.
I love that story, with the coach. And, I think it really is important because a lot of people, think that, showing up is all that they need to do. And clearly, there's certain people that go through the initiative, have done all their homework that they possibly could, have intelligent questions, and clearly are very driven. And that's a pleasure to want to help them get to that next level
Yeah.
versus somebody that essentially, hasn't really done the work. Um, and so, it's one of those things that, obviously they, the mentor needs to want to participate,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of stuff that the mentee can do that will help them make themselves a lot more appealing.
Yeah.
And so, I think you said it, really, really well. Um, at the end of the day, as you get, older and you reflect and say, hey, look, I didn't get here. In particular, I grew up a very middle class, household, didn't have, really any connections with wealth, and I'm completely a product in terms of where I've been able to get to. of people that have helped me along the way. And so I feel, a strong sense of obligation of needing to do something similar. But at the same time, there's a limited number of hours in the day.
Right.
So somebody who
Right.
takes the initiative, and it reminds me of, I think, Steve Jobs talking about him cold calling, I think, Packard from Hewlett Packard,
Yeah.
asking for spare parts. Um, and the reality is very few people will actually do it.
Right.
So if you think about what distinguishes, the extraordinary from the ordinary, the reality is it's not that much. It's about, doing what you say you're going to do, showing interest, putting in the time, and definitely something that dramatically increases the
Yeah.
likelihood that they're going to respond,
Yeah.
positively.
Yeah. And it's not just doing it once, like just keep doing it until eventually it's like, oh, yeah, lucky. No, I just kept doing the same thing until eventually it worked, It's gonna
Sure,
work
sure.
eventually, right? That's awesome. So, you have a business, yeah, obviously keep busy lifestyle and what you do professionally and you have children. One of the things that I'm always curious about because I find it's one of my areas of, constant opportunity for growth. It's the integration of, the family, the life, the fitness side, the health side, plus the business. Like, how is that all for you? Like, what are some of your, tips to keep it all, tidy and all? You never feel like you're underserving one part of your life, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, look, it's a great question. The reality is, I don't think I have it figured out. I think it's a continuous battle, and just like we grow, so our children and other
Yeah.
people, and life happens. Um, so I think it's one of those things that you constantly have to work at. Quite frankly, my biggest challenge is not around the time allocation; it's around my mind share, right?
Hmm.
So I'm at home with the kids, and I want to make sure that I'm fully present and pouring as much of my energy and soul into them, because otherwise, yeah, you can physically be present, but just in a totally different world, worrying about this big business thing or whatnot. And
Yeah.
quite frankly, I've been guilty of that. Um, what I've tried to do, and there's a great book that I've read called "Buy Back Your Time,"
Mm.
which I think has some really great insights across a lot of different things, particularly around intentional lifestyle design and living the life that you want. But one of the big kind of takeaways from it is working backwards and say, okay, what are the non-negotiable priorities that I have? Okay, I want to work out at least a few times a week. I want to make sure that I, make it to, the Saturday, game or to the recital or whatever it is, scheduling those things first. And then, thankfully as an entrepreneur, having the flexibility to schedule a lot of the other obligations, around it. The other thing that I've realized is, and it's actually, one of the highlights from the book is, not all time periods are created equally. So I personally, for very intense, kind of detail oriented work, do much better early in the morning than I do later in the afternoon.
Mm.
So really trying to manage my energy, and prioritize the things that are the most important, first is um, something that really has helped me, tremendously.
Yeah.
But let's be realistic. In M&A, it's a business where there's a rush to the end. Um, you know, Business and opportunities don't necessarily present themselves in a very kind of orderly, linear way, and so plans have to be flexible. But I think one thing that I'm grateful for is uh, you know, like I mentioned earlier, deal making is something which I feel is kind of I was innately built to do. It's something I personally enjoy. Even if I didn't make money from it, I would continue doing it. And so it makes the distinction between the personal and the professional much more blurry. So, for
Yeah.
example, particularly earlier in my career, I mean, I had bookshelves of books that were technical and all that I just basically, um, ate through very quickly. I don't think that would have occurred had it been a topic that I really was not fully all in and
Yeah. Yeah.
bottom on. I
Yeah.
think the last thing is and also a huge amount of gratitude is having a supportive spouse. So I met my spouse, my wife, um, as an entrepreneur. Quite frankly, uh, it was just right before we met that things started clicking. Before that, did all right, but never, made a living, but didn't really kind of generate the scalability and the growth that we were, really able to, our full potential of being able to reach. But I think that that's also a really important element of having somebody that's supportive and understands the dynamics, because flexibility, particularly when big opportunities emerge, is something
Right.
which pretty much is foundational.
Yeah. Adaptability, right? I think that's the big thing, is right, be able to prioritize it, put it on the calendar, make sure that the important things are on there first, but then those may have to adapt and still make sure they're on there somewhere, but flex if need be. That's just life, right? It's just not letting it overrun you, steamroll you, but just making sure you can pivot if necessary. Well, I appreciate it, David. I want to make sure people can find, where can people find you online, your book, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Sure. So LinkedIn is probably the best way to get connected with me. David McCombie is my name. The book is available on Amazon, Selling Your Business with Confidence. Same with Barnes and Noble and a handful of other
Cool.
booksellers. And if anybody wants to shoot me a note, also happy to respond my email, which is dmccomby@mccombie.com. I can definitely send it to you.
Yeah. We'll make sure we list it in the show notes. Well, I appreciate it, the time, David. It was, insightful and helpful, and I'm sure it'll help a lot of people in their journey as entrepreneurs. And we'll talk again soon. But thanks for hopping on.
Sounds great. It was great seeing you. Thanks for having me. That's it.